I looked at my phone longer than usual. The numbers seemed ordinary, yet something inside me stayed unsettled. I could not explain why it felt wrong. I counted the week again in my head. We had bought only what we needed, nothing more. Still, the balance was lower than it should be. I nearly dismissed it as worry. Some thoughts visit for no reason and leave the same way. Then I remembered one small detail that had stayed with me. The week had felt simple and routine. No sudden purchases, no emergencies, no loud surprises. Everything moved the way ordinary days usually do. That was the part that troubled me most. When life looks normal, missing answers hide easily. If everything was fine, why did enough no longer feel enough? I prepared breakfast the way I always do. Toast, eggs, and warm tea made the kitchen feel steady. In moments like this, routine can sound like peace. Our man sat at the table, scrolling his phone. His relaxed face made the room feel lighter for a second. Sometimes I borrow calm from other people. I wash the dishes while listing groceries in my head. Rice, soap, vegetables, school snacks. A home is often built from small repeating numbers. By noon, I folded clothes in the living room. Mira played quietly on the floor beside me. Nothing looked luxurious, yet it all felt enough. I opened the banking app again, for no clear reason. The numbers were ordinary, but my chest tightened. Some warnings arrive without words. I replayed every expense from the week. Nothing stood out enough to blame, yet the total kept feeling unfamiliar. We ate dinner together and laughed at something small. Plates clinked, Mira smiled, and the room felt normal. Normal can be very convincing. Later, I realized comfort had made me stop checking closely. We had called it fine for too long. Quiet problems often grow inside quiet days. I asked our man quietly while folding dry clothes. The question sounded simple, but it had been sitting in my chest all day. I only wanted a steady answer. He answered right away, almost before I finished asking. The speed of it stayed with me more than the words. Quick replies can sound smooth and still feel thin. I nodded because that was easier than pushing further. I wanted to trust him and return to the day, but my body kept holding the question. That night I opened the expense notes after everyone slept. I matched each number one by one. The quiet made every detail louder. There were many small purchases we never talked about. Snacks, fees, quick taps, little conveniences. Each one looked harmless alone. But together, they had weight. Quiet spending had been stacking itself for months. We never heard the sound of it building. I stopped writing and held the pen in place. My hands were not shaking from losing money. They were shaking from seeing clearly. It was not only about where the money went. It was about how easily life moves when no one is really looking. I sat there understanding more than I wanted. The next morning, I tried to move through the day as if nothing had changed. I wiped the table, folded towels, and stayed busy on purpose, but quiet thoughts kept returning between each task. I swept the kitchen floor slowly, following the same lines as always. My hands knew the routine better than my mind did. The more the floor cleared, the less clear I felt. A simple truth began to surface. We never really checked things together. We only lived by the feeling that we had enough. Each expense had looked harmless on its own. A meal delivery, a subscription, one more small convenience. They never arrived loudly enough to be noticed. Nothing seemed wrong while it was happening. Then I imagined all of it added together. The weight appeared only after the counting. I wanted to speak to Armin again that evening, yet hesitation sat beside me like another person. I wondered if I was making too much of it. Then another thought arrived and stayed longer. What if I was right this time? Some answers feel heavier before they are spoken. I looked around our home and saw how easy comfort can be. We had been living normally, but not attentively. Sometimes silence is just unopened information. Myra walked toward me holding her drawing book close to her chest. She smiled gently and asked for new colored pencils. Her small request landed heavier than it should have. I paused for a moment before answering. It was not about the price. It was the feeling of not knowing what was safe anymore. I smiled and nodded so she would feel ease. My face stayed calm while my chest tightened quietly. Strange how a simple yes could feel so complicated. Myra returned to playing as if nothing had changed. Children know how to stay in the present. I noticed I no longer could. I was not afraid of having less. I was afraid of missing the signs, while everything still looked normal. Quiet problems often wear familiar clothes. That night I sat longer than usual after everyone slept. No television, no small distractions. Silence finally had room to speak. It was only me and the numbers on the screen. They looked plain, but they had become more honest than our conversations. I kept reading until patterns appeared. For the first time, I stopped repeating that we were fine. Something inside me had already changed. Truth arrived quietly, but it stayed. I finally understood something simple. We did not have one large problem waiting to explode. We had many small things quietly piling up. None of those habits looked dangerous on their own. Each one felt normal in the moment. That was why we never stopped them. We were not hiding anything from each other. We were simply moving too fast to notice. Sometimes honesty is present, but attention is missing. Being fine is not always the same as being safe. Sometimes it only means nothing urgent happened yet. I sat with that thought longer than expected. I opened the notes again with a different purpose. I was no longer searching for a shocking number. I wanted to see what repeated itself. Then the pattern became clear. Small spending, little pauses, daily repeats, nothing loud yet impossible to ignore once seen. It was not a dramatic mistake. It was a quiet habit that never asked to be questioned. We let it stay because it felt harmless. And suddenly, many months made sense. Not because life changed in one day, because I finally saw what had been there all along. That night, I spoke to Arman again, after the house grew quiet. My voice was softer because I was no longer trying to win. I only wanted us to look at the same truth together. I told him I was not afraid of having less. What unsettled me was living on guesses for too long. Silence felt heavier than shortage. He did not answer right away. He kept reading the numbers line by line. For once, his attention stayed there longer than his confidence. He never said, "We're fine," that night. The room stayed quiet instead. Somehow, that honesty felt like relief. We began with something simple. Every expense from that day went onto the page. Small acts suddenly had names. Nothing was too minor to include. Snacks, parking, delivery fees, all of it belonged. Seeing everything together changed the feeling of it. It felt strange, not because it was hard. It felt strange because it was clear. We had avoided clarity by calling it normal. For so long, we believed awareness meant intention. But wanting to be careful was not the same as being careful. That lesson arrived quietly. A few days later, the house felt different in a quiet way. Nothing outside had changed much, yet I felt less lost inside it. Understanding can make a room feel lighter. I opened the banking app without bracing myself first. The numbers were the same kind of numbers, but now they had context. Certainty is often quieter than relief. Arman began asking small questions he used to skip. He looked at details instead of walking past them. Change often arrives in ordinary habits first. We were not suddenly perfect. Small purchases still slipped in, and old patterns still returned sometimes. But now they were visible when they happened. Awareness changed more than money did. We moved slower, but with less confusion. Even small steps feel steadier when you can see the ground. Mira asked for something small again. This time, I answered without the pause that used to sit in my chest. Knowing our place made kindness easier. We did not have more than before. We simply stopped pretending not to notice. Honesty can feel like abundance when worry has been taking space. Nothing in our life looked dramatic from the outside. The dishes still waited, the laundry still came, the bills still arrived, but inside me everything had become clearer. Money problems rarely announce themselves. They often arrive in days that look completely normal. I only noticed them after many quiet moments had already passed. It was not one large expense that changed things. It was the small habits I stopped questioning. Each one felt harmless on its own. The risk was never having less. The risk was believing comfort meant safety. I can see now how easily calm can hide neglect. When I stopped checking, decisions kept moving without me. Little by little, I handed over control to routine. Nothing felt urgent, so everything continued. Maybe the answer was never more income. Maybe it was speaking honestly before worry became distance. Real steadiness begins when we are willing to look clearly together.